Hi everyone, I'm Professor Carr. I work in the Religious Studies department, and my area of specialization is Jewish studies. I've done a lot of research on Jews in Eastern Europe, and I teach a course on Jewish life in Poland. So that's actually a great place to start for thinking about your class on Russia and Eastern Europe. That when I say Poland, I interpret that to mean all of the Polish Lithuanian Empire at its largest, which leads right into this week in thinking about empire in Russia. Because after having been really the largest empire in Europe, Poland had a kind of quick descent and was partitioned in the late 18th century. So, as you read about the shift toward the Pale of Settlement, this is in the portion of the partition of Poland that went to Russia. Other territories of Poland went to the Austro Hungarian Empire as well as the Prussian Empire. But really, a majority of Jews who had lived in Poland suddenly, in really what was like overnight, 5 years, became Russian Jews. And Russia went from having zero Jews as a policy really based in anti Semitism to having more Jews than anywhere else in the world. That about 80% of Jews in the world by the 19th and 20th century lived in Eastern Europe. So we're talking about, for Jewish life, this is the biggest and in some scholars' argument, most important Jewish community. So I want to say a few things too about a background about Judaism for what we're thinking about. So when we're talking about Judaism, I think there's a difference that should be made between Judaism and something larger like Jewishness. In Yiddish, the spoken language of Jews in Eastern Europe, there really are not two distinct words. The word is Yiddishkeit, and so that's more like a Jewishness. And it includes what we might conventionally perceive to be religion, as well as a lot of what we might connect with ethnicity or culture or these other terms. So if we're talking about Judaism, we're talking about a set of practices based on some canonized texts. So the central text, conceptually the most authoritative text, is the Hebrew Bible. This has more or less the same content as the Christian Old Testament, if you're familiar with that. In Judaism, the Hebrew Bible is called by the acronym TaNaK. So there's a T, an N, and a K. The T stands for Torah, or teaching. Sometimes Torah is translated as law, but that's actually incorrect. There's a lot more to the Torah than law, and the word itself means teaching. While that has been a central part of Jewish liturgy and culture since maybe the 6th century BCE at the latest, there are a lot of other texts that are important. So the second group of texts that's in the Hebrew Bible, or the TaNaK, are Nevi'im, or prophets. Those describe life in the ancient Israelite kingdom that existed, life really from around 1200 BCE to 200 BCE is the latest text, and that's the book of Daniel. Those, while they chronicle an idea of covenant, of a special relationship between the Jewish people, or the people of Israel, and God, a relationship based on a kind of mutual promise that if Jews keep God's commandments, then God will take care of Jews. That's what covenant is. Then the prophets is a collection of texts that thinks about the relationship between the covenant and the ancient Israelite empire. A lot of the critique of the prophets of that empire, though, was related to social justice. So if you are familiar with the prophets, or if you're not, a lot of the ways that people turn to the books that are the prophets today is to think about social justice, to think about relationships. Especially the text tends to refer to strangers, which is really a way of saying immigrants, widows who had very few rights, and orphans. So the text is concerned essentially with the most vulnerable people in society and judging society by how the most vulnerable people are treated. And then the last collection is the writings. And so these include some of the more familiar texts, the book of Psalms. There are 150 basically poems or hymns. There are proverbs here and a lot of other texts. But importantly for Judaism, there's also a body of commentary. And the most important text for that is called the Talmud. So the Talmud was written from the 1st to the 6th century as a commentary thinking about two things. One is called Jewish law, or halakha. And Jewish law is considered basically to be the binding practices in Judaism. What's obligatory to be a good or an observant Jew? Then we have a lot of other material there where it's theology, it's stories about sages, it's speculation about the cosmos. And these are kind of interwoven all throughout the Talmud. If we looked at the Talmud on the library shelf, it's huge. It's very, very big. And the bulk of the material is this non-binding aggada. That in Judaism, theological positions and other things like that, ideas about cosmology, generally are not binding. People can believe what they want. The rabbis saw that it's far easier to regulate practice than to regulate belief. So if we're used to thinking about religion as related to people's beliefs, we need to shift what we're thinking about to understand Judaism in general, and I would argue religion in general, that we need to see other aspects of religion. And I think it's one of the really useful things about studying Judaism, that not only does it challenge us to think about Jewish life, but it gives us a new perspective of religion. So these are the canonized texts that are central in Judaism, that are interpreted. There's bodies of commentary. There's something like legal rulings all the way through the time period that we're talking about. So in the next video, then, I'll talk a little bit about the differences in how people understood them. But I just want to clarify, when I'm talking about Judaism, that, and I'm talking about these texts, the TaNaK and the Talmud. And in particular, we're talking about the practices that people have. And so one of them includes textual study. That is a central practice of Judaism. But other things like how to pray, how to eat, all of these other things, these come out of either the Talmud itself or centuries of then interpreting the Talmud.